Forget what you've heard about boomers bankrupting America. The truth is, the fastest growing drain on the U.S. budget isn't Social Security, but rather the interest payments on the national debt, projected to hit $1.6 trillion by 2030, dwarfing what we spend on retirees. So, is the narrative about older generations spoiling the economy actually true? It's a really popular idea right now, especially as we head into 2026. You see headlines everywhere about Social Security insolvency and an aging workforce. But when you dig into the actual numbers, the picture gets way more nuanced, and frankly, a lot more interesting. We're going to dissect the real data, from federal spending trends to productivity shifts, and compare today's challenges with historical precedents. By the end, you'll understand the actual economic forces at play, and stick with me, because the last part of this is the piece almost everyone gets wrong, and it's the part that really shapes the economic landscape for someone in your situation. There's a popular narrative circulating today, suggesting that older Americans are essentially spoiling the economy, hoarding wealth, driving up prices, and creating a burden on younger generations. But the data from 2026 tells a much more nuanced story. For example, did you know that while household wealth for those 65 and over has increased by roughly 35% since 2019, a significant portion of that growth isn't liquid cash, but tied up in illiquid assets like primary residences, which actually saw an average appreciation of 42% in that same period? This isn't just about rising home values, it fundamentally shifts the perception of their economic impact. We're also seeing some interesting trends in consumer spending. Data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis indicates that individuals aged 65 and up contributed about 21% of total consumer spending in 2025, a slight increase from 19% in 2015. This isn't the picture of an economically stagnant demographic. We're going to dive deep into these numbers, look at why phrases like boomer wealth hoarders miss the mark, and break down what's really driving economic shifts. The lesson here is that simplistic narratives often obscure complex realities, and understanding those complexities is crucial for anyone trying to make sense of their own financial future. That increase has largely been in illiquid assets, like real estate, not cash? Here's a stat that really flips the script. Older Americans are actually an invisible economic engine, projected to spend a staggering $12 trillion by 2030. Think about that for a second. That's not a drag on the economy, it's a colossal driver. The idea that seniors are just sitting on their wealth doesn't quite square with their actual spending habits. On average, older Americans spend about $52,000 per person annually. To put that in perspective, imagine a small town where every single resident over 65 is pumping that much into local businesses. That's serious economic activity. A closer look at where this money goes reveals consistent, essential spending. About 25% of their annual outlay is on healthcare, and another 20% on housing. These aren't discretionary splurges, they are fundamental parts of the economy that consistently generate demand for services, jobs, and products. The lesson here is that this demographic isn't just saving, they are actively consuming. Consider someone like Janet from Iowa, who, at 72, still buys groceries every week, maintains her home, and has regular doctor's appointments. Her individual spending, multiplied by tens of millions of people, quickly adds up. In fact, older Americans account for about 40% of all U.S. consumer spending. That makes them the backbone of demand for countless industries, from pharmaceuticals to home improvement to your local diner. So, while we often hear about the challenges of an aging population, the significant purchasing power of older Americans is often overlooked. But what about those who aren't just spending, but also contributing through work? The retired workforce is quietly saving industries. The narrative of retirees solely enjoying their golden years misses a key point. 30% of those 65 and over are currently working or actively seeking work. This isn't just a minor shift, it's a significant jump from 19% in 2000, revealing a quietly surging workforce. In fact, older workers, those 65 and above, now constitute 15% of all American workers, stepping into crucial labor gaps across sectors from healthcare to education. Take, for example, the nurse shortage that intensified in 2022. Many hospitals saw retired nurses returning part-time, bringing decades of experience that new graduates simply haven't accumulated yet. These aren't low-skill jobs, either. The myth that older workers are less productive is directly challenged by the data. A 2023 study by AARP found that 70% of businesses report their older employees are more reliable and possess invaluable experience. This isn't just about showing up, it's about institutional knowledge, mentorship, and a steady hand during turbulent times. Even the gig economy, often associated with younger generations, has seen significant embrace from seniors, with 20% of those over 65 participating. This provides flexible income streams and fills niche labor demands. For instance, a retired engineer might consult on projects remotely, or a former teacher could tutor online, offering expertise without the constraints of a traditional 9-to-5. The lesson here is that a substantial portion of older Americans aren't just consuming, they're actively contributing to the economy, bolstering industries, and providing a stable, experienced labor force. But beyond their direct earnings, there's another hidden contribution that injects over $50 billion into the economy every single year. Here's a stat that might genuinely shock you. Older Americans are contributing an invisible $50 billion to our economy every single year. You might be wondering, where is this massive contribution coming from if it's so invisible? Well, it's not showing up on balance sheets, but it's absolutely critical to how our society functions. Volunteerism. A full 35% of Americans aged 65 and over generously dedicate their time to volunteering. That's a huge chunk of the population giving back. This isn't just a feel-good story, it has massive economic implications. We're talking about a staggering 2 billion volunteer hours annually. If you put a monetary value on that, based on the independent sector's estimate for the value of a volunteer hour, which was around $25.43 in 2020 and has only increased since, it translates to over $50 billion in services that our communities receive for free. Think about that. $50 billion that doesn't come out of taxpayer pockets, yet directly supports vital community services. Consider programs like AARP's Foundation Tax Aid, where older volunteers help millions of low-income and elderly individuals file their taxes for free, saving them money and reducing stress. Or the retired teachers who mentor at-risk youth, filling critical educational gaps. These aren't just minor contributions, they're the bedrock for countless nonprofits, hospitals, and social programs that would otherwise struggle to operate. The lesson here is that focusing solely on financial assets or income overlooks a monumental, direct contribution to our collective well-being and economic efficiency. But this isn't the only unacknowledged area where older Americans are truly making waves. What about their role in driving new ideas and economic expansion? And here's a stat that completely redefines innovation. 25% of all new businesses in the US are started by older Americans. We're not just talking about wisdom, we're talking about pure economic dynamism. These aren't just hobby ventures, many are seasoned professionals leveraging decades of experience and networks to launch successful enterprises, injecting new life into sectors and creating jobs. Take for example, someone like a former marketing executive launching a consulting firm or a retired engineer developing a specialized software solution. Their experience reduces startup risk and often leads to more sustainable businesses. But the economic contributions don't stop there. There's also the often overlooked grandparent economy, where older Americans spend an estimated $60 billion annually on their grandchildren. This isn't just birthday presents, it's a consistent boost to retail, educational services, and entertainment, directly supporting consumer spending. Think about all those toy purchases, contributions to college funds, or family vacations. Then we have the critical caregiving economy. Older Americans provide a staggering 70% of all informal caregiving in the U.S., supporting adult children, spouses, or other family members. This quiet, unpaid labor saves billions in potential healthcare and assisted living costs, acting as an invisible safety net for families across the nation. Without this, our formal healthcare system would be under immense, unsustainable pressure. And looking ahead, there's the massive wealth transfer predicted. An estimated $68 trillion is expected to be passed down by 2045. This isn't just future consumption, It's a colossal injection of capital into future investments, real estate, and philanthropy, reshaping the economic landscape for decades to come. The lesson here is clear. Older Americans are not just beneficiaries of the economy, they are indispensable architects of its present and future. But what about the idea that they're a burden on our entitlement programs? But here's the real bombshell. Social Security and Medicare are not going bankrupt because of older Americans. The common narrative paints a picture of retirees as a fiscal drain, but that's a dangerous oversimplification. Consider this. The average American worker contributes 6.2% of their earnings to Social Security and 1.45% to Medicare through payroll taxes for their entire working life. For someone earning the median income of about $56,000 annually, that's over $4,200 every year for decades. This isn't a handout, it's a return on investment, funded by their own lifetime contributions. The real challenges to these systems, as Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and the Social Security Administration's own actuaries have highlighted, stem from factors like declining birth rates, which reduce the worker-to-retiree ratio, and rising healthcare costs, especially for breakthrough but expensive medical treatments. For instance, in 2022, the Medicare Part B premium was $164.90 per month, covering physician services and outpatient care. A significant portion of these costs are driven by advances in medicine, not simply by more people living longer. Furthermore, the economic activity of older Americans, whether it's through their spending as consumers, their continued work, or their entrepreneurial ventures, generates substantial tax revenue. When a 70-year-old consumer buys a new car for $35,000, they contribute sales tax, and the car company pays corporate tax, indirectly supporting the very systems we're discussing. So, the narrative of older Americans spoiling the economy is a dangerous oversimplification. The lesson here is that they are not just recipients, they are indispensable contributors across every sector, from consumer demand to entrepreneurship and volunteerism. So, the lesson here is clear. Framing older Americans as an economic burden isn't just inaccurate, it completely misses the enormous, often invisible, contributions they make to our economy and communities. From providing essential labor to fueling a $50 billion volunteer economy and even driving 25% of all new business startups, their impact is undeniably positive and vital. The narrative that Social Security and Medicare are collapsing due to retirees is a dangerous oversimplification that ignores the decades of contributions workers make and the complex financial realities. Instead of seeing an aging population as a challenge, we should recognize their indispensable role in securing a prosperous future for all generations. Have you seen the economic contributions of older adults in your own community, maybe through volunteer work or a startup? Share your observations in the comments below. And if you want to understand the real math behind the headlines and cut through the financial noise, hit that subscribe button. Next, you'll definitely want to check out my deep dive into how changing demographics are actually boosting certain sectors of the economy, showing where this trend is creating massive opportunity.